The IT security management architecture for your computer network is no different in 2021 when I'm making this video to how we did things in 1997 using Windows NT 4. Yeah, the server hardware was refreshed and the server operating system updated, but the security and management architecture is still how we did things in the late 1990s. You've migrated your email from an on-premise Microsoft Exchange server to the cloud with Microsoft 365 Exchange Online. But after that was done, your migration to the Microsoft Cloud stalled. And as a result, so did your IT security and management modernization using Microsoft 365. You're not done. You still have a lot more work to do. And you still have an on-premise file server with rudimentary security group access controls. You still have domain controllers that you domain join client computers to. You still have a local backup system and a disaster recovery system based on spinning up virtual servers offsite in a disaster. You've got third-party antivirus you're needlessly paying for with no or weak centralized management. You still do manual setups of end-user computers and have no centralized end-user computer management. And for the few places that have group policies, they're usually very basic. And how do I know this? Because at Xerillion, we have about 50 calls per month with companies we've never spoke to before that are interested to get rid of their servers and go 100% cloud using Microsoft 365. And usually what's on their mind is they just want to get rid of their on-premise hardware, migrating their file shares and phone systems to Microsoft 365, integrating Microsoft Teams into their company, or migrating their legacy server-based business apps to third-party web apps or a Microsoft Azure virtual network. They know that the Microsoft 365 subscription they're paying for is capable of so much more, and they've come to the proper realization that they need a Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider to get them properly set up in Microsoft 365. And then they give us a call, and that's good. And I'm glad they're taking the first steps in calling a Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider, but they're just mainly thinking about getting rid of the servers. And they aren't thinking about modernizing their IT security management and taking this opportunity to build a strong, secure foundation for their data and apps to sit in, their users to work in, and the users' devices to connect to. At Xerillion, before we migrate a company's on-premise services to Microsoft 365, we have to make sure the foundation of the client's IT security and management is updated and modernized. And that involves making sure the IT security and management services in Microsoft 365 are configured properly, the user's computers are configured and secured properly, and the users are trained on how to use this modern collaboration system productively and securely. And if the company has an internal IT team, that the IT managers are trained on how to manage this system. This video is going to be about transitioning your concepts of IT security and management from a legacy on-premise system based on Windows Server Active Directory to a modern Microsoft 365 cloud services system based on Azure Active Directory, and how the other important security management pieces of Microsoft 365 build off Azure Active Directory to keep your data secure, under your control, and keep your users' computers running smoothly, and keep your IT system drama-free. And I'm going to show you how we do this in a real-world, practical way for our clients every single day. I'm going to connect the dots for you, connecting what you're used to securing and managing in a Microsoft Windows server-based world to what those pieces are in a Microsoft 365 cloud services world. And then once we get the basics taken care of, show you how all the modern security management systems in Microsoft 365 that take your computer network security to a whole new modern level. And this won't be fluff. I'm going to be taking you through the stuff that really matters and is realistically implementable within a 3 to 6 month time frame. The same things we build out for our clients. And don't kid yourself. You won't be able to watch this video, then Google search the Microsoft knowledge base or how-to pages on what needs to be done and get the training and experience you need to have the confidence to do this migration if you don't do these migrations and support these Microsoft 365 cloud services daily for a living. But this video will give you what you need to get beyond not knowing what you don't know, or only knowing Google search, disorganized key terms, bits and pieces, to being oriented and being able to have a smart, thoughtful conversation with your Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider. And it doesn't have to be Xerillion, but you will need to get a Microsoft certified cloud solutions provider with gold level competencies in Microsoft 365 that can get you transitioned, supported, and help you make this new system your own. And I'm going to address all the typical IT security management items an internal IT manager deals with. Domain controllers, domain joined WindowsOS client computers, security groups controlling access to file server shares, on-premise backup and disaster recovery systems, on-premise firewalls, VPNs, client computer setups and imaging, and computer antivirus. I'm going to show you how all of this is managed in Microsoft 365 Cloud Services systems, and all the services that are included in the Microsoft 365 subscription you're paying for but not using. And then I'm going to show you, once we've transitioned off your legacy IT security management systems, how to expand and advance your Microsoft 365 security management services, giving you Fortune 500 level security that you can brag about to your clients, your investors, your board of directors, the CFO, the CEO. Then I'll show you which subscriptions we recommend, the pricing, and what I recommend your next actionable steps should be. I've been working professionally full-time in IT for the past 24 years, and for the past 20 years as the founder and president of Xerillion. And there has never been a more exciting time to be an IT systems manager. I'm about to show you some of the coolest and most practical IT security and management systems available to you with Microsoft 365. And it is mind-blowing to me that you can get all of this starting at $20 per user per month. So let's get into it. Now, the first thing we're going to address is the low-hanging fruit, and that's email security. Because as I mentioned earlier, most of you have migrated your email to the cloud using Microsoft 365 Exchange Online. And most of you are using the effective but basic malware and spam filter that comes with Microsoft 365 Exchange Online. But at Xerillion, we always add a security improvement add-on subscription to our proposals that most companies aren't aware of, and that's safe links and safe attachments inside of Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Safe attachments takes email antivirus filtering to the next level, and in addition to an attachment being scanned for viruses and malware, each attachment is put into a special virtual container and detonated. Or in other words, safe attachments replicates a user double-clicking on the attachment as they would when opening an email attachment, and then Microsoft Defender analyzes the attachment's behavior when it executes. And if Microsoft Defender sees the attachment is trying to do something spooky, like install itself in Outlook so it can scan your emails, watch what you're doing, or install itself deep in the computer's operating system, it'll block that attachment even though that attachment didn't register as a virus. In fact, there are times when you get a new email that has an attachment, you'll see the attachment replaced with a message stating that the attachment is being scanned by Microsoft Defender for Office 365. And you might have to wait a few minutes before you can view the attachment. And that's really reassuring for advanced or zero-day threats that are primarily going to use your email to attack your system. And it's also protection that you just don't get with the basic filters that come with Exchange Online. The other key technology for email protection with Microsoft Defender for Office 365 is safe links. With safe links, all links inside of every email your company gets, which clear the spam and malware filters, have the original links stripped out. And a Microsoft Defender safe link is put in its place. The email doesn't look any different to the users, but when a user clicks on a safe link, Microsoft Defender then kicks into action and checks if that email link the user clicked on is trying to take the user to a malicious website or a fake website, or it's just doing something suspicious. And if Safe Links doesn't like what it sees, it'll block that user from continuing onto that website that might potentially compromise that user's computer and your company's data. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 Plan 1 is a $2 per user per month add-on, and it's another layer beyond the basic email, virus, and spam filters in Exchange Online, and protects our users from zero-day threats, malicious websites, and keeps our systems quiet, our data safe, and company IT drama-free. And as I'll discuss later on in this video, Microsoft Defender for Office 365 also has important protections for our files. Now, with your email in Microsoft 365, how are you backing up your email? My experience is that most companies haven't even thought much about how emails are backed up or how they recover emails once they've migrated their emails to Microsoft 365 Exchange Online. They're just grateful not to have to deal with an on-premise Exchange server anymore. And that's strange because when their email was hosted on an on-premise Exchange server, they would of course make sure that it was backed up locally. But once they have an Exchange Online, I think they just assume Microsoft has it covered, and they don't really think much about it. I have a very detailed video about backups in Microsoft 365, and I'll post the link in the description. But essentially in Microsoft 365, we don't back up emails. We manage data retention policies, which are much better than old-fashioned backups. Most people aren't aware that the default email retention policy for an email that is double deleted in a mailbox. So in other words, it's deleted from the inbox and then deleted again from the deleted items folder. And the deleted items folder is essentially our mailbox recycle bin. That email will then go to the mailbox recoverable items folder where it is permanently deleted after 15 days, unless we have configured a retention policy. What we do for clients is we adjust the default behavior to a defined retention policy to keeping the email for 3 years and then at the end of 3 years, delete it. So what this protection does is no matter if a user double deletes an email, it'll be retained for 3 years, not the 15-day default retention policy. And then at the end of the 3-year retention policy, it gets deleted permanently. You can also choose to extend your retention policy. You can go from a 3-year retention policy to 7 years. Or if you want to replicate a legacy IT system approach, you can specify a forever retention policy for emails, though it's a terrible idea. Old emails become noise in the system and carry weight and costs to keep under IT management. And these emails you keep forever make for bulky mailboxes and ultimately are a legal liability for you beyond any regulatory compliance policies your company might have. The best policy is to give your email a life cycle. It is created, it has a lifespan of a few years, and at some point we kill it by deleting it. And all of that can be automated by a defined retention policy in Microsoft 365. Stop trying to keep 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years of email chats and spam with you forever. Now, obviously a key transitional IT security item to allow us to modernize IT security management in Microsoft 365 is what we do with Active Directory. And Active Directory is where we store all of our user accounts, computer accounts, security groups, group policies, and it's the foundation for everything we do to modernize our Microsoft 365 security. So let's go over how we make that transition. We'll be migrating from Windows Server Active Directory to Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1 and being at least on Premium Plan 1 or Premium Plan 2 if you can swing the upgrade over Plan 1. And I'll get more into why you'd consider doing that later in this video. But being at Premium Plan 1 is key. The other two versions of Azure Active Directory, the free version and the version that comes with Office 365 desktop apps, doesn't have what we need. And everything we do around configuring a modern Microsoft 365 security management system involves Azure Active Directory Premium. So I want to be really clear on that. Then you might be wondering, well, normally I join my client computers to the local domain controllers. So how does that work in Microsoft 365 if I don't have Windows Server domain controllers anymore and I'm just using Azure Active Directory? In Microsoft 365, we go from the traditional concept of a domain join, which we're all familiar with in Windows Server Active Directory, to an Azure AD join in Azure Active Directory. So in doing that, we'll be joining our Windows computers to our Azure Active Directory domain, and then Azure Active Directory knows that computer is a trusted device on our Microsoft 365 tenant and registers that computer to that user so we can easily manage our users and their devices, and then that Windows computer will be automatically enrolled under Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which used to be called Microsoft Intune. And that's how we'll configure and secure that Windows computer. And I'll be digging much deeper into Microsoft Endpoint Manager later in this video, as it's a very important component of our modern Microsoft 365 IT system. And lastly, once you've moved your Windows Server Active Directory to Azure Active Directory in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, you'll be able to set up a true BYOD, or bring your own device, policy to your company like we do at Xerillion. We rent business use of our employees' personal computers that effectively buys them a new computer every 2 years. They get to use the brand of computer they want, and they get their personal computers paid for by the company, and Xerillion doesn't have to maintain a computer inventory. But we maintain full control over our company data and apps while having no access to their personal data or personal apps. Users take their personal computers and smartphones and do something called a workplace join, which establishes that computer as a trusted device. And with the permission of the owner, allows us to manage the security settings in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, but registers that device as a personal device, not a corporate device in Azure Active Directory. And again, before we move on, I'm going to be covering a lot about Microsoft Endpoint Manager later on in this video. Once we have Azure Active Directory firmly in place, the very first thing we need to address is multi-factor authentication. When companies come talk with us for the first time, this is their normal setup for multi-factor authentication. They either have nothing or they have it set up for IT admins only. It's very rare that we talk with a company that truly has it enforced across all user accounts. I bet it's only 1 out of every 100 companies we talk with. And having it set up for just admins misses the point that cyber criminals are looking for entry through your weakest links, and they don't need admin access to get their work done. Once they get into any account, from there, they can work their way up the food chain, researching emails to see if they can impersonate users and their emails to execute a phony money transfer or blackmail a company by exposing embarrassing or legally damaging emails or locking up important files. It's really best just assume that all your user accounts and their passwords are exposed on the internet. And you need to put in measures that block sign-ins from devices that Azure Active Directory has not confirmed belong to that user. And that's, of course, what multi-factor authentication does. When Azure Active Directory sees a user who always logs in from a specific computer in the United States and now is entering in the correct login and password from Indonesia on an unknown computer, I'm sure you'd want to at least challenge that sign-in by ringing that user's cell phone or sending a code to that user's alternate email address, or simply clicking a notification through the Microsoft Authenticator app on a smartphone. Of course we'd want that. And that's Security 101 when you have a professionally configured Microsoft 365 IT system. We need MFA for everybody. Now, I know that one thing that usually holds IT departments back is that they feel MFA is a daunting project and will lead to their users being locked out of their computers, and then company executives are upset with the IT department. But it's mostly just a lack of experience getting MFA rolled out to a large number of users successfully, which is, of course, something we help our clients with all the time. But it must be done for all of your users. One thing I'll point out is that sometimes a company still has business software or network devices that are critical to their operations, but that device or software can't log in with modern authentication and accept a multi-factor authentication challenge. And in that case, we would instead use app passwords. In our practice, we use app passwords for legacy service accounts that need to log into Microsoft 365. An app password is a very long, all-numeric password that is meant to be entered into a device or software one time, and that login is then known to Microsoft 365 to be extra trusted, and it can bypass MFA. I'll also mention, as a side note, you can also establish trusted public IP addresses that allow us to configure that any sign-ins behind that public IP address are considered safe and will not get an MFA challenge. And that is only available through Azure Active Directory Premium. Now, one thing you're probably not aware of, and for sure you don't have with Windows Server Active Directory, is a service in Azure Active Directory Premium called Global Password Protection. Global Password Protection takes your IT system that allows weak and commonly used passwords that are well known on the dark web and changes it to automatically block them from being used in your company by your users. Simple as that. Global Password Protection is not about making passwords complex or forcing your users to create new passwords every 6 months and then blocking them from reusing their last 15 passwords, which causes them to write down their passwords somewhere, creating its own security issues. Instead, it blocks users from using weak and commonly used passwords. And we can even add in customized lists of banned passwords, such as ones that might use variants of your company's name. And you only get this with Azure Active Directory Premium. Now, when it comes to passwords and resetting them, it's one of the most tedious tasks in IT support. So why don't we set up and train the users so they can self-reset their own passwords? Again, once Azure Active Directory Premium is firmly in place, we can go from IT help desk assisted manual password resets, which are tedious for the IT department and an expensive low value service for the company to provide through its help desk, to users being able to reset their passwords themselves quickly. And if you still have Windows Server Active Directory domain services in place, Azure Active Directory Premium will be able to write back the newly reset password into the on-premise Windows Server Active Directory. And since we're on the subject of passwords, which is such a basic IT security management topic, you really should consider updating the concept of entering passwords at all. Just like your cell phone, you don't enter in passwords. You use your fingerprint or facial recognition, or even worst case, a PIN or a pattern to log in to your smartphone. And here's the thing, we can do the same with Windows 10, and it's cheap and it's dependable. And I use it all the time. And I'm talking about Windows Hello and using facial recognition, using a webcam or a fingerprint reader, and both are cheap. And for many of you, you already have a webcam and fingerprint reader on the company laptops you order. The point here, though, is that the more we can reduce old-fashioned password re-entry to log into a Windows OS computer, the more secure and stable our Microsoft 365 IT system will be, the safer our data will be, and the lives of IT people will be better everywhere. And it's crazy that our personal smartphone sign-in experience is more advanced, secure, and user-friendly with biometrics than our corporate IT computer sign-in experience. Now, as we transition to and modernize our corporate IT security and management under Microsoft 365, I want to go over a few advanced Azure Active Directory services available to us and that we put in for our clients that want to be able to brag to their clients, their potential clients, their investors, their board of directors, that they have the most advanced security that Microsoft makes. So here's a very basic and important question I want to pose to you. Why do we allow anyone to log in from anywhere in the world when we only expect them to log in from the United States, which is the case for most of our clients at Xerillion? It's crazy to me that a cyber criminal that gets a hold of some of your users' credentials can attempt to sign in from countries you'd never have people signing in from in the first place. And here's what's even crazier. All we have to do is set up something in Azure Active Directory Premium called a geographic block, a rule that simply states, no matter what, you only allow sign-ins from inside the United States and other countries you want to provide permanent sign-in access to, which, if you have any at all, should be a very limited few, and everywhere else is either blocked by default or provided temporary access for people who are traveling. Let me tell you, this cuts down on so many problems. We set this geographic sign-in block for all of our clients, and you should too. And if we upgrade from Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1 to Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 2, we get Azure Identity Protection. And that's where we get behavioral machine learning threat detection. In other words, Azure Identity Protection learns what is typical sign-in behavior for your users and establishes a behavioral baseline specifically for your company. Then, when it sees a sign-in attempt that is outside of your users' normal behavior, it scores that sign-in risk. Then we at Xerillion configure an automated response if the risk rating reaches a medium or high level. We can force a new multi-factor authentication challenge. We can force a password reset, or we can block the account and alert the IT admins. Additionally, with Azure Identity Protection, we also get a compromised account hunting service enabled with Azure Active Directory. And the way that works is Azure Identity Protection searches the internet and dark web looking for publicly exposed user credentials, a username, normally an email address, and a password. And if it finds one of your user accounts publicly exposed, it can automatically disconnect any open sessions for that user, force a password reset, or disable the account if you prefer. And I've seen this in action at clients and even personally for myself. Think about all the different website accounts that you've created that use your company email address as your username, and you entered the same or similar password as your Microsoft 365 Azure Active Directory account. Do you know if any of these third-party websites have been hacked? Do they call you and tell you about it? You're better off assuming some of them have been hacked. And so having this exposed identity protection service with Azure Identity Protection is highly valuable to keep your IT system drama-free. And ultimately, how we enforce things like geographic blocks or risky sign-ins is through something called Azure Active Directory Conditional Access Policies. This is where we say it's not enough just to be an authenticated user who entered in their username and password correctly. We've got specific conditions that we require about how you log in, where you log in from, what apps you're logging in with, and how you're authenticating that must be true before you're allowed into our Microsoft 365 system. Most companies only require a user to enter in a username and a password to access the company computer network and to view and hold company data. There is no regard for where that user logged in from, how risky their login looked, and if their computer or smartphone they connected in with is in fact a company-managed computer or a secured personal smartphone. And that's what Azure Active Directory conditional access policies enforce. And these policies weed out a lot of noise and stress and security issues on your computer network on an automated basis. Now let's get into file sharing security. So you know what's interesting? When companies come talk to us for the first time, one of the biggest things they contact us about is getting help migrating their on-premise file shares to Microsoft 365 and getting rid of that file server. And the reason they end up throwing in the towel and calling a Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider is that Microsoft doesn't have a Microsoft 365 Cloud Service product called Microsoft Windows Server File Shares Online like they do for Microsoft Exchange Online. In other words, they don't have a cloud-based version of traditional Windows Server file shares that people can map drives from their client computers to. So to make this shared file migration from on-premise to Microsoft 365 Cloud Services happen, we're forced to make a choice. You either pick Microsoft Teams channel files or SharePoint document libraries. And I have a very, very detailed video on this subject on our YouTube channel, which I will link to in the description. But I highly recommend building out your modern file sharing and document management system in Microsoft Teams channel files. And don't worry, we can still do it in a way that gives users that map drive look and feel that they're used to inside a Windows File Explorer. But for those people that want access to those same files and Teams, they can do so. So for the traditional users that want a map drive look and feel, you have them covered. And for users that want to work in Microsoft Teams in a modern collaboration environment, you have them covered as well. And Teams is easier to set up and maintain from a security and management standpoint. And this is where all of Microsoft's document management and productivity development focuses at. That being said, people are usually more familiar with SharePoint and they assume that's where they need to move their on-premise file server shared files to in Microsoft 365. And that's where working with a highly experienced Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider is very helpful because they can steer you in the right direction that is best for your company long-term. At Xerillion, we used to move client on-premise file shares to SharePoint document libraries. And about 3 years ago, we switched to moving those shared files to Microsoft Teams. And I'm telling you, it works a lot better and it's better long-term for your company. Then when it comes to securing access to your shared folders in Microsoft 365 with Teams, it's very easy. Each team we create in Microsoft Teams automatically creates its own corresponding security group. And we just add or remove users to the team group inside Microsoft Teams. And it's very intuitive to use. And inside the team, you can also create private channels and include or exclude people in the main team. You can also give ownership to a non-technical department manager and let them maintain user access, freeing up IT support requests. I have a detailed demo video on this, and I'll link to it right at the spot in the video where it shows how to do this, and you'll see what I mean about how intuitive it is to manage security in Microsoft Teams. Now, if a company really wants to use SharePoint document libraries, then we create SharePoint security groups and apply them to the document library folder, just like we do with traditional Windows Server file shares. Again, I don't recommend this route, but if you really want to see this in action, I'll link to the demo video I mentioned earlier right at the spot in the video that shows how we do this. And many companies have what we used to call user folders or home drives, but it's private work file storage for the user on the file server. And when it comes to migrating those private user work folders, that's really easy. Those file folders go straight to the user's private OneDrive folder. Simple as that. Now, what I just shared with you about file server security really just replicates the old school IT late 1990s security architecture most IT managers are used to and replicates it to Microsoft 365. But come on, I didn't bring you this far just to give you 30-year-old document management security architecture. We are here to modernize your IT security. Now, the issues with traditional folder-based security is that once users have access to a folder, the files that sit inside those folders are not secured by anything. Once someone has access to the folder, they can do whatever they like with the files and the intellectual property in those files. copy, delete, share, steal, take to a competitor, use it to start their own business. Nothing is logged or tracked. And that's what a Microsoft 365 service called Microsoft Cloud App Security fixes. Microsoft Cloud App Security provides insider threat management. It uses machine learning, behavioral monitoring, threat detection, and creates a baseline for typical user behavior with files in your company and logs and tracks everything done with your files. If someone is doing a huge unusual download or a huge external share or a huge deletion, wouldn't you like to know? Of course you would. Microsoft Cloud App Security can be configured to email that user, letting them know that the activity is being logged, and CC a network administrator to say, hey, just so you know, we see you downloading the entire sales folder and we're logging the activity. And that might be enough to stop the threat. Or we can just configure Cloud App Security to disconnect all the user's live sessions and disable the account, giving IT admins time to see what's actually going on. The point is, Microsoft 365 Cloud App Security was monitoring your files day and night and protecting your company's data and intellectual property. And this isn't to say that everyone has malicious intent when doing unusual things with company files. We can also use this technology to prevent people from making innocent mistakes. And this modern document management security isn't even an expensive add-on to a Microsoft 365 subscription. And I'll cover the specific Microsoft 365 subscriptions and their costs we set clients up with later in this video. Now, with our shared files in Microsoft 365, let's discuss how to protect your company's shared files from viruses, malware, Crtyolockers, and ransomware in general. So most companies have no protection or weak protection against viruses and ransomware on their file servers. They're hoping their top-level security groups, firewall, VPN, email filters, and computer antivirus clients are enough to keep the threats away. But it's very basic protection, and really, it's still 30-year-old IT security architecture. Now, the first thing I'll say is that I've never seen a successful Crtyolocker ransomware attack in a Microsoft 365 system. And that's across 250 plus client tenants over the last 7 years. I've seen plenty of successful Crtyolocker attacks against Windows file servers. Also, the built-in restore and recovery options in Microsoft 365 are vastly superior to the third-party file restore and recovery architecture companies typically have on their traditional file servers. And we'll get more into file restoration and recovery in a moment. But let's focus on ransomware and Crtyolocker prevention to avoid even having to go to a restore and recovery. And for that, we use Microsoft Defender for Office 365. You might remember that from earlier in this video when I talked about it with advanced email protection through safe links and safe attachments. Well, when we add this onto our Microsoft client subscriptions, in addition to scanning email attachments for malicious files, it also scans file uploads to Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive for viruses. And if a file is flagged as a virus, it blocks the upload. And I've seen this happen to me before. One time I was trying to upload a file I thought was clean, and the file was blocked by Microsoft Defender for Office 365. And that made me feel very good. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 was actively looking out for me. Then remember when I was just talking about Microsoft Cloud App Security and how it continually monitors what users are doing with data in the system against a normal pattern of behavior? As a second layer of defense, if somehow a zero-day virus comes out and somehow knows how to look up files of Microsoft 365 and somehow gets past the virus scanner for files of Microsoft Defender for Office 365, which is all extremely unlikely, if you have Microsoft Cloud App Security seeing a massive file modification against your entire document library, shared folders being attempted, well, that certainly is going to be an unusual pattern of behavior, and we'll have it configured to automatically disconnect all live sessions for that user's account where the attack is coming from, block access, and disable that user's account. That's real serious, modern, sophisticated protection, and for 99% of the people watching this video, it's protection they didn't even know existed. And how do I know this is the case? Because whenever we talk to new prospective clients, I know we're educating them on these advanced Microsoft 365 security topics for the first time. And all of this is protection before we even get into the file and restore recovery options, the backups available once you have your files inside Microsoft 365. So let's get into that. Obviously, being able to restore and recover your company files is basic IT management and security 101, and we certainly have that covered in Microsoft 365. And this is what most companies have: on-premise third-party backup software and hardware, or a third-party online backup service. Now, some of you have systems that cover both backup and disaster recovery, and that was great 10 years ago. But it's worth pointing out that disaster recovery is included for free with Microsoft 365 because all of your IT services are already in the cloud. And I'll get into that shortly. But for now, we're just talking about backups and how that pertains to file recoveries and restores. Document management, no matter if it's in Teams shared files, SharePoint document libraries, or OneDrive, it's all SharePoint technology on the back end at the end of the day, which should make you feel good, but don't let that confuse you. Remember, my recommendation for your shared files in Microsoft 365 is to use Teams files. Anyway, with our shared files in Microsoft 365, we get document versioning, which automatically keeps track of the changes you make to your Office document files, and they automatically get saved as you go as you work. Users can easily go back to previous versions of their files from minutes ago, days ago, or months ago. And with our documents in Microsoft 365, we also get a two-stage recycle bin. And remember, we don't get recycle bins with old-fashioned Windows Server file shares. The first stage recycle bin allows users to recover deleted files on their own. And the second stage allows admins to recover double deleted files, such as the case when someone really wants a file to be gone off the system. And as if that weren't enough, we then configure a file retention policy to hold onto all files, regardless of their deletion status, as it appears to general users, in a special folder called the Preservation Hold Library. And that file will sit there until the retention period is up. And then we recommend that once a file has reached the end of its retention period, just like email I talked about earlier, that you practice good data governance and have the retention policy automatically delete that file, because carrying around all this old, mostly useless data is just noise in your system. Or you can also specify a file reverts back to the default retention policy, which is that a file will stay in the system forever, and if it is deleted, it will be removed after a total of 93 days in the first or second stage recycle bins. It's important to understand a key difference between having our files in Teams channel files versus SharePoint document libraries. With Teams, I can specify a retention policy on a team-by-team basis inside Microsoft 365, because every time I create a team in Teams, I create a separate Microsoft 365 group, which creates a separate SharePoint site. This allows me to specify different retention policies of, say, a forever retention policy for files in the legal HR team, and a 7-year and delete policy for all other teams inside of Microsoft Teams. With SharePoint, typically we create a single site with all the necessary shared folders as document libraries. And that means the entire site will have the same retention policy. Or if that doesn't sound good to you, we have to make separate SharePoint sites based on different retention policies you want. And that is more confusing to navigate than Teams. The bottom line is, designing out your shared files in Teams gives us the most flexibility and simplicity when it comes to implementing file retention policies. And if we swing back one last time to addressing Crtyolocker or ransomware threats, in an extremely unlikely scenario where a virus somehow locks up all of your files in Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, then you'll have the option to restore previous versions of the files or the entire document library if you want. These file and recovery concepts of document versioning, two-stage recycle bins, data retention policies, and preservation hold libraries are usually foreign concepts to most IT managers out there, but they exist. And they come included with your Microsoft 365 subscription. You just need to find a Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider that knows about this stuff and how to implement it. Now let's cover another area that is IT Security and Management 101, disaster recovery and business continuity. And guess what? This is another easy one. Most companies we speak with have weak or untested disaster recovery business continuity. And in plenty of cases, they don't have any offsite disaster recovery. And those that do, the offsite disaster recovery requires spinning up virtual servers in the cloud, connecting users to those emergency virtual servers using a VPN, maybe spinning up some virtual desktops. And really, the concept of disaster recovery is also dated. Being able to spin up virtual copies of our servers offsite or in the cloud and give all the users remote access was okay 10 years ago. But these days, we want true business continuity. We want our IT to continue without interruption if we can no longer access our office. So let's forget about disaster recovery and spinning up servers outside the office somewhere and stick with the goal of true business continuity. In other words, no interruption in IT services at all. And here's what's great. With Microsoft 365, business continuity, true business continuity, is included for free. There's no additional hardware, software, or service or office space to purchase and maintain to achieve full, true business continuity with Microsoft 365. For those that have a monthly expense tied to replicating your legacy virtual servers offsite, and for companies that can range anywhere from $500 to $5,000 a month, plus a hardware refresh every 5 years, all those expenses are gone. Microsoft 365 Cloud Services have a 99.9% financially backed uptime SLA, are geographically redundant in their many Azure data centers around the United States, are completely managed by Microsoft with a level of efficiency and scale that neither you or I could ever achieve. So why are you hosting your own backup and disaster recovery system when it comes for free with Microsoft 365 Cloud Services? And when it comes to true business continuity, let's not forget about your company's phone system as part of your planning. Most companies have either an on-premise phone system or a third-party hosted phone system that isn't even integrated with their IT system, which is crazy. Migrate your company phone system to Microsoft Teams and complete your IT business continuity with the Microsoft Teams phone system, and you get a full-featured phone system that is completely integrated with Microsoft Teams, can be accessed through a traditional desk phone, or like most companies do, accessed directly through the Microsoft Teams desktop app with a headset or the Teams mobile app on your smartphone. At Xerillion, we migrated completely to the Microsoft phone system in May 2017. And so as of the making of this video, we've been on it for 4 years and it works phenomenally well. I have a very extensive video covering the Microsoft phone system in detail that I'll link to in the description, as well as another video of the best single presentation I've ever seen in a Microsoft conference about how Microsoft is becoming a global telecom, which I'll also link to in the description. But at the end of the day, to achieve full true business continuity for your company, you need to complete your Microsoft 365 modernization by integrating the Microsoft phone system into your company. Now, another one of the most basic common tasks in IT management is computer setups and configurations. Most companies do manual end user computer setups on the fly for their users, and some companies that continually have a large number of computer setups will have some type of client computer imaging system. And a small subset of companies have Windows Server Active Director group policies deployed. Though again, my experience is that for the few that do use them, the policies themselves are very basic. Manual setups aren't consistent and they're tedious, and imaging systems need to have their images maintained and updated as new hardware and software comes out. Both of those issues are solved with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which was formerly known as Microsoft Intune, and using Endpoint Manager configuration profiles. And this is where we go in and create a configuration profile with all the settings and toggles we want selected and configured for a computer on our IT system. All those little settings that you have to remember to set, you set them in the configuration profile, save it, and then when any new computer comes into your network and is Azure AD joined or Workplace joined, the computer will automatically be enrolled under Microsoft Endpoint Manager and the configuration profile settings will be applied. And it gets even better, because if you want to make changes to all of your existing company computers, you simply make the change to the configuration profile in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and then Microsoft Endpoint Manager through the cloud goes out and makes the changes to all the computers. Now let's take our computer setups and configurations up a whole other level. And that's going from Microsoft Endpoint Manager configuration profiles to Microsoft Endpoint Manager security baselines for Windows 10, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and Microsoft Edge. You can think of these as Microsoft best practices for securing Windows 10 client computers. So if you go in and make your first configuration profile in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, you'll see an overwhelming amount of configuration options. So many you might not take on implementing this technology, but a great starting place is to enable Microsoft Endpoint Manager Security Baselines, as it'll configure a lot of the security settings that you never be confident enough to know what they do or if they'll screw up your users' computers. And it's important to know that security baselines will expose security holes in your system, causing apps to stop working and make your users complain. But again, remember, security baselines are exposing security weaknesses. So of course, you need to do a test deployment. Find out what breaks, determine if you can fix the breaks, or if you can't fix the breaks, then determine if you can live with the security exposure. Now, Computer Security 101 tells us we need antivirus on our computers. And what we typically see when we talk with companies for the first time is that they have some type of third-party paid antivirus in place. And we explain to them that they already have corporate-grade antivirus that is included with Windows 10, which is Windows Defender antivirus. And people will sometimes ask us if this is actually good antivirus because they have the old Windows Security Essentials antivirus from 10 years ago in their mind. And people generally felt Windows Security Essentials was more consumer-grade antivirus and not as good as Trend Micro, Norton, Kaspersky. But Windows Defender antivirus, which is not the same thing as Windows Security Essentials, is all we use with our clients. And it's all we use at Xerillion. You do not need to pay for another third-party antivirus solution. And Windows Defender antivirus can be configured and managed through Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Again, what used to be called Microsoft Intune. And even better, inside security baselines, which I just spoke about for Windows 10. There are best practices settings already configured for Microsoft Defender antivirus, which is amazing. Now let's take our computer antivirus up to a more advanced level, and that's Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is different from Microsoft Defender Antivirus in that it uses Azure machine learning technology to learn a baseline behavior of apps on your computers, the way your company works with them. Not just scan files on computers to see if they match a virus signature, but actually monitor what apps are doing on your company computers compared to a baseline behavior specific to your company. And when it sees an app that's starting to do unusual things and determines that while it doesn't register as a virus, its behavior has risen to a medium or high risk, we can automate processes to block that app, disconnect that computer from connecting to our Microsoft 365 tenant, or alert an IT admin and the user that they have a compromised account. At Xerillion, we use Microsoft Defender for Endpoint ourselves, and our top security conscious clients, often financial service companies, usually elect to pay to upgrade to this level of security as well. And what's really cool is that Microsoft Defender for Endpoint has a security baseline configuration profile, which I just spoke about, inside Microsoft Endpoint Manager that we can use and will immediately give us Microsoft's best security practices to configure Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now, another IT security management 101 type service is protecting company data in the event a computer or its hard drives are lost or stolen. And we talk with companies, pretty much 100% of them do not have encryption enabled across their company computers, which is nuts because Microsoft Bitlocker disk encryption is included with Windows 10. You don't have to pay for a third-party disk encryption service. And I can reassure you that enabling Bitlocker is easy and doesn't impact the computer's performance. Think about your cell phone. Its storage is encrypted. Is that encryption bogging down your cell phone's app performance? Has that idea even crossed your mind? I doubt it. Your cell phone's data storage is encrypted and you don't even think about it. But when IT managers think about encrypting WindowsOS computer hard drives, they assume the performance is going to be impacted because 15, 20 years ago, encryption definitely did impact performance. And as a result, nobody wanted their computers encrypted. Encryption technology has come a long way since then. It does not impact performance. And you can push this configuration out through Microsoft Endpoint Manager and use the security baseline settings for Windows 10. And in case you're worried about losing the Bitlocker recovery key with Azure Active Directory Premium, Azure Active Directory automatically stores a user's Bitlocker recovery key. And if that user boots up their computer one day and gets the message from Windows 10 that due to changes on the hard drive, and to protect the user and the company data, Windows 10 requires the user to enter in the Bitlocker recovery key, that user can just go to another browser on their smartphone or another computer, log in to the Microsoft 365 portal, go into their account and retrieve their Bitlocker recovery key. And while Bitlocker is included with Windows 10, the Bitlocker key storage is only available through Azure Active Directory Premium, a topic I hope you can see we keep coming back to over and over again. And can you imagine anything worse than doing the right thing, enabling Bitlocker disk encryption on your computer, get prompted by your computer to enter your recovery key, then realizing you never wrote it down or can't find your recovery key. And you do a frantic search on the web, you find out that to your great relief, you can retrieve it from the Microsoft 365 portal, only then to find out that it isn't there because your company didn't have the premium version of Azure Active Directory that automatically stores it for you. That would be awful. And to take things even a little further, if you have your company computers managed through Microsoft Endpoint Manager and they are lost or stolen, you'll have the option to remote wipe or even configure a remote wipe automatically based on the number of failed logins or time since the computer checked in with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Again, this is automated security, keeping your company data and your customers' data safe and allowing security managers, compliance managers, and company ownership to sleep easy at night. Now, how about protecting your users as they are browsing around the internet on Edge, Chrome, or Firefox web browsers from known malicious websites or suspicious websites? What protection do you have there? Well, again, for most companies, they have no protection for company computers as their users are browsing around different websites. With Microsoft 365 Defender for Endpoint, we get web threat protection and web content filtering. Web threat protection blocks devices at the network layer from accessing low reputation malicious websites that try to trick users into installing malware or ransomware on company computers. And web content filtering allows you to block content from company computers based on categories like porn, gambling, and sports. And again, this protection works with Edge, Chrome, and Firefox. I also want to point out something that you'd be wise to standardize on as a security modernization, and it'll make your system more secure. And that would be to standardize on a single web browser for work computers. Right now, web browsing is a free-for-all at most companies in that they don't have a standard web browser, and most IT people use Chrome, and they let users use whatever they want. And many users will click on the Edge browser just because it's the default in Windows and they don't have a browser preference. And then some users will download Google Chrome because it's what they prefer and use personally. And the IT department might have some content filtering and safe link protection going on through the firewall, but that's rare. If the goal is to allow users to reliably access the websites they need at work, and knowing that an attack vector into your IT system is through an email link that leads to accessing a malicious website through a web browser, if we really want to lock down that attack vector, then you should standardize on Microsoft Edge, the Chromium version, which is the new version of Microsoft Edge. Microsoft Edge is built on Chromium, just like Google Chrome. So there aren't any website compatibility issues, but with Edge, we get the security technology that runs web apps or websites in a virtualized container. And if websites have malicious code trying to install themselves on a computer or steal credentials, they will be blocked inside the container. Also, if we've upgraded from Microsoft Defender Antivirus to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, we can use Microsoft Endpoint Manager to deploy Microsoft security baselines for Microsoft Edge, which will configure your system and tune it to Microsoft's best practices for safe and secure web browsing. So block Google Chrome from your standard computer setups. The IT admins can still use it, and standardize on Microsoft Edge with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, deployed and managed through Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Now, in the Microsoft 365 IT security management world, what if you have legacy on-premise server-based business apps that are still very important to your business? We see this plenty of times with a server-based business app that usually involves a Microsoft SQL Server, and that app manages sales, finance, and operations. The company really wants to go 100% cloud, and they know they need to migrate this business software to a web-based version. But for right now, they still need our help to get files, phones, security, and management systems migrated to Microsoft 365. And they need to keep this legacy server-based business app. So how do we bring modern security and business continuity to those legacy server-based apps? Well, the first thing we need to do is migrate those servers from your on-premise network to a Microsoft Azure virtual network. And I've got a very extensive video on this subject about migrating legacy server-based business apps to Microsoft Azure, which I'll link to in the description. But we get the company out of the server hardware game by building an Azure virtual LAN, making copies of your on-premise virtual machines, and rehosting them in your new Azure virtual LAN. And then we access those servers through a VPN or by using Windows Virtual Desktop. And then the client just pays for the compute and storage they need for the servers until they're ready to migrate their legacy app to a web app. And then we simply shut down the Azure VLAN and all the virtual servers inside of it. Then once we have a client's servers lifted and shifted from their on-premise network to an Azure virtual network, we've got disaster recovery and business continuity taken care of. Because of the fact that those servers are no longer on site and are off-site and inside a Microsoft Azure data center. So in the solution, the disaster recovery and business continuity are included for free. For antivirus and backup, we use Azure Backup and Azure Defender. We configure Azure Backup to take 3 snapshots a day of the virtual machines, allowing us to recover individual files or the entire VM. With Azure Defender, we get machine learning threat protection for servers, similar to what we got for client computers with Microsoft Defender for endpoint. Azure Defender monitors things that are going on in your servers against a 30-day machine learning behavioral baseline that it creates. And when it sees apps or humans doing unusual things to the servers, if something scores a high security alert, we can configure an alert with a human remediation, or we can configure automatic remediation, such as disconnecting all user sessions, or shutting the server down so the threat doesn't spread to the other servers. Now, how about the old school firewall-based VPN you currently host on your local area network? Most companies typically have an on-premise firewall appliance hosting a VPN. But once everything is up in Microsoft 365, your days of dealing with a VPN are over. No third-party VPN is needed any longer, and once you have all of your computers enabled with Microsoft Bitlocker encryption, you now have an amazingly secure setup, where all of your data is encrypted end-to-end. It's encrypted up in the Microsoft 365 cloud. It's encrypted in transit between the Microsoft 365 cloud and your computer, and encrypted at rest on your computer's hard drive. Most places have no encryption on their servers or on their client computers, and the only encryption happens in transit across the internet with the old school VPN connection. And once you're in Microsoft 365 properly configured, your data is encrypted fully at rest, in use, and in transit. That's real serious and proper security control. And the amazing thing is 2/3 of that encryption is already done for you. You just have to manage the end user device encryption, the enablement, configuration, and conditional access checks for all the devices connecting your Microsoft 365 tenant. And even that isn't complicated, but it's a case of not knowing what you don't know and not having a partner to guide you properly. And this is why you should always remember this important point. When all of your data was on premise, your firewall was your firewall. When all of your data is in Microsoft 365, Azure Active Directory is your new firewall. And that's why in this new modern enterprise cloud world we live in, Azure Active Directory and identity protection is the foundation for all of the security work we do in Microsoft 365, and why it was the security starting point for this entire video, which takes us to the traditional old school on-premise firewalls in general. Most companies have pricey on-premise firewalls that have 1 to 3 year warranty, software, and support renewals, and 5-year hardware refreshes, and generally aren't integrated with the company's Windows Server Active Directory. And that creates 2 user directories to manage, in addition to a 3rd with Azure Active Directory. Once everything is moved into Microsoft 365, you have to ask yourself, what is that on-premise firewall really protecting? It isn't protecting much. It's really just becoming a glorified network address translation device, creating a simple barrier between your local area network and the public internet. So do we really need to continue to purchase a firewall that costs the company $2,000 to $10,000 and another $1,000 to $2,000 a year in service renewals? I don't think it makes sense. There are 100% virtual companies out there with 100, 200 plus users with no physical offices, and everything is in the Microsoft cloud. All their users are just connecting through their ISP router, and there isn't a corporate grade firewall anywhere. How about your smartphone when you connect to the company email service in Microsoft 365? Do you use a firewall device between your smartphone and Microsoft 365? Of course you don't. Again, Azure Active Directory is your firewall. Now, let's touch on an important point when it comes to overall IT management, and that's on-premise hardware refresh cycles. And that is the tedious process of watching your on-premise server and networking equipment go end of life, and you having to refresh it so you can at least make a case that you're properly maintaining your IT system. And to ensure that when you do need support for a server, you can actually get it. Because if your server hardware or software goes end of life, you're pretty much on your own. And so when we speak with companies, typically they want to get out of the business of doing server hardware refreshes. They usually replace their server hardware every 6 years, and the server manufacturer won't let them go into a 7th year of a warranty renewal. And really, that old of a system is getting so risky in any event. With everything in Microsoft 365, there's no server refreshes ever again. Once we migrate a company's emails, files, phones, security, and management into Microsoft 365 and any legacy server apps to a Microsoft Azure virtual network, they pay for that one-time project and then they're done forever. We're not faced with dealing with this again in a 6-year cycle. And the client just adds or removes subscriptions as needed with the expansion or contraction of their company user base. That is incredible flexibility. And all that will be left on premise besides the user's computers will be a basic firewall, network switches, wireless access points, and network printers. Now, I went over all the things an IT manager with a legacy on-premise system is used to managing, and shown you what that looks like in a Microsoft 365 system. In some cases, I've covered the basics like how you'd handle backups, disaster recovery, business continuity, antivirus, file sharing, security groups. And in multiple cases, I show you how you could step up those services to a more advanced and modern level, such as going from Microsoft Defender Antivirus to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, or managing computers with Microsoft Endpoint Manager configuration profiles and moving to security baselines, or moving from Azure Active Directory Plan 1 to Azure Active Directory Plan 2 and using Azure Identity Protection, or moving from basic file folder security controls in Teams files or SharePoint and using Microsoft Cloud App Security behavioral monitoring to track and log all activity that's happening with your files and company intellectual property. But I want to take this a step further and go over the security management available to you inside Microsoft 365 that you've never had, but is available to you and is practical and modernizes your IT security management without being cumbersome or frustrating for your users. And the first thing that we'll go over is, why on earth do we allow employees to connect and sync company email and files to their personal smartphones without any controls whatsoever? It's nuts that 99% of companies do just that. Most companies, when we speak to them, have no access controls or data controls over employees' personal iOS or Android smartphones connecting into the company's Microsoft 365 cloud services and syncing emails or files. The company allows the users to use whatever app they wish with no idea how secure it is. They don't log the access and they don't have any control over the data once it's on the smartphone device. It's nuts. Also, the company is uncomfortable having any software installed on an employee's personal smartphone, as they should. We can do so much better than that with Microsoft 365 using something called app protection policies that you can configure using Microsoft Endpoint Manager. App protection policies work like this. Instead of putting software on a user's personal smartphone so we can control our company data, we manage our company mobile apps that the user chooses to download from their app store, and we specify which company apps are allowed to connect into the company's Microsoft 365 tenant. So the company purchased a Microsoft 365 subscription that comes with mobile apps that the employee chose to download and install on their personal smartphone, such as Outlook Mobile, Teams Mobile, or OneDrive Mobile. And the company controls the app and the data in the app, but not the employee's personal smartphone. And we can control what the employee is allowed to do with that company data once it is synced to the company app on their personal smartphone. We can and do put controls that don't allow the employee to copy files outside of the company Office mobile apps, such as downloading sales files directly to their smartphone local storage or their personal Google Drive or iCloud. And we can also configure what security settings we require of that smartphone to connect to our Microsoft 365 tenant. We don't configure their personal smartphone device, but we check the configuration of their personal smartphone device, like having a lockout screen, encrypted storage, having an up-to-date version of iOS or Android, really basic security settings that if they don't have these things in place, they really shouldn't be connecting into our Microsoft 365 tenant and having our data on their smartphone in the first place. And using this app protection policy, we can configure that if that employee is no longer with the company, that on the next sync, company data will be removed from our mobile app. Or if the app hasn't checked in with the Microsoft 365 tenant to verify that employee still has an active subscription, data will be automatically removed from our app after, say, 14 days or whatever we specify. Now, another advanced security modernization concept is moving away from having multiple user accounts in Microsoft 365 and other third-party websites the company uses to having a single Azure Active Directory account to enable or disable employees' access to Microsoft 365 and third-party web apps, and assign users access to third-party web apps like we assign access to shared file folders using security groups. Most companies have many different user accounts to manage, administer, and secure for each employee. There's an Azure Active Directory account, a local Windows Server Active Directory account. There are additional accounts to access on-premise software for sales, finance, and operation, and additional accounts for third-party websites, also usually for sales, finance, and operations. Maybe even another account for the VPN. So onboarding an employee requires setting up multiple accounts. Offboarding an employee requires tracking multiple accounts and disabling them. And forgetting to disable an account when an employee leaves is a security concern. And while you have control over your Azure Active Directory account security, you don't have control over the security of third parties that hold your other work accounts. Again, those accounts all have generally the email address is the username and the password is the same or similar to your Microsoft 365 account. I mean, how many passwords can an employer remember before they start writing them down? The likelihood that your third-party web apps have been hacked exposing employee passwords on the internet should be assumed. And even if cybercriminals do get a real password from one of your employees, the Microsoft 365 Azure Active Directory can, at a single point, block access to everything. And that's exactly what Azure Active Directory Single Sign-On does for us. With Azure Active Directory Single Sign-On, you create accounts on third-party websites for your users, but the identity to access that account on the third-party website is just their Azure Active Directory identity. You place their Azure Active Directory identity in the third-party web app account, telling the third-party web app that you are requiring Azure Active Directory to verify the identity of the user, not the third-party web app, thereby giving that employee access to the third-party web apps. It's essentially like adding them to a security group. Now they have access, and that employee just has to remember their Microsoft 365 Azure Active Directory login, which will include all the protections you have with Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1 or 2, depending on what you picked. And if the employee is no longer with the company, you disable their identity in Azure Active Directory from a single location. And now that former employee doesn't have access to anything. You don't need a separate third-party single sign-on service like Okta or Duo, which I see companies usually in the very early stages of testing out because they're not even aware that Azure Active Directory Premium has single sign-on. Now, as we modernize our IT security management with Microsoft 365, I want to introduce you to Microsoft 365 Security Group buttons, which are actually called Microsoft 365 sensitivity labels, but I think calling them security group buttons makes the concept easier to understand, and they're very simple and powerful. Most IT people are used to Windows Server Active Directory security groups and how we use security groups to protect file server shared folders. So let's say we have a shared folder for the finance department, which would clearly have sensitive data, and we want to control access to that folder. We create a finance security group in Windows Server Active Directory, then apply that security group to the finance shared folder, limiting only members of that security group to the finance folder, and then add or remove people to the security group to give or take away access to the finance shared folder. And that's how we've done things since the mid-1990s. But the problem is that once a user has access to the finance folder, we no longer have control over the files and none of the activity is logged. The files sit naked in that finance folder. A user could copy, delete, share, and print that data and nobody would know. And the user could do this by mistake. It doesn't have to be malicious intent. And once those files are moved out of the finance folder, anybody can see the data, even if they're not a member of the finance department. That wasn't even great security architecture in the mid-1990s, but it was all we had. We can do so much better in the 2020s. With Microsoft sensitivity labels, we can take that finance security group and apply it to a button that shows up in Office apps like Word, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, and Teams. And just by clicking that button, that file is now only available to people in the finance department, no matter where in the world that file goes or who has it. If someone thinks that they're going to take company data with them when they leave the company, once their account is disabled, they can no longer access that data in the spreadsheet, even if they've copied that file to their personal computer or a thumb drive. If they forward that data to someone outside the company or even their personal email account, and that person isn't an authenticated user in our Azure Active Directory tenant, they won't have the ability to see that document. We can even restrict users from being able to print, save as, or make screenshots. And yes, I get that you can take a picture of the screen with your phone, but that would be a very tedious process, and it would also force you to re-enter data from a picture, and that would be a deterrent. I have another video where I go into detail in a demo on this, and you can see it in action, and I'll link to it in the description. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Wouldn't it be nice if our IT system vetted a user's device to make sure it met our security requirements before being able to access our network and view and hold our company data? Why would we let any authenticated user connect into our IT system with any device they want with no regard to the security configuration of the device they're connecting in with? The answer is we shouldn't. And that's why we use Azure Active Directory conditional access policies with Microsoft Endpoint Manager device compliance policies to automatically manage this for us. When we talk with companies for the first time, they're configured with 1990s device compliance management, which is to say there's no compliance management. Users can connect into the company IT system with any device they want, as long as they authenticate with a username and password. There's no regard for the security of the computer or smartphone they're connecting in with to access, view, and hold company data, which is nuts. With Microsoft Endpoint Manager compliance policies, we can specify exactly what settings and configurations we require of WindowsOS, iOS, macOS, and Android devices before they're allowed to connect into our Microsoft 365 system and view and hold our company data. Even if the user is completely legit as authenticated by Azure Active Directory, once we have a compliance policy in place with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, when that user is signing in and has passed authentication with Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory then checks with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which is in charge of making sure the device the user is connecting in with is compliant with our company IT standards before the final access is allowed. That's very powerful automated protection, and that automation reduces the security noise that IT managers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, freeing their minds up for higher value and more interesting work for the company. Now, I want to point out a key difference between maintaining a legacy on-premise server-based system and a Microsoft 365 cloud services system. And before I get into that, I want to be very clear about this very important point. A Microsoft 365 cloud services system must be looked after and maintained. For IT managers like me who got into IT management in the 1990s and 2000s, if a server-based system was up and online, we considered ourselves as doing a good job. For the most part, our main concerns were about hardware failures and software failures that would take the servers down. In those days, proactive maintenance meant logging into servers to check backups, to check system event logs, and just generally looking to see if the server was doing anything weird that might cause us to get a call from the users saying that they can't access the server. And then find out that the server blue screened And the IT manager then might have a very stressful late night or a very early morning to get the server back online. In general, it was very reactive IT work. And our jobs were more about being IT firefighters, dealing with trying to put out fires as they came up. And we'd set up all this crazy hardware redundancy to deal with potential hardware issues. In a Microsoft 365 cloud services world, those days are long gone, and thank God. Microsoft manages the hardware and software in a gigantic array of redundant server racks and data centers the size of the Pentagon across the United States and across the world. And where you used to log into servers in an on-premise world, you now log into portals to check your system. And a Microsoft 365 system generates lots of alerts and notifications you need to pay attention to. But they're a different type of alert. Not alerts about failed hard drives on your RAID controller or failed backups, but alerts about changes to various services and information about how those changes and updates might affect your users. And things you might have to do to prepare for those changes that require configuration adjustments or updates to computers, smartphones, or tablets that connect to your Microsoft 365 system. Microsoft is continually updating and modernizing Microsoft 365, and keeping up with the changes is a full-time job. And you need to be monitoring that and determining how those changes apply to your company's users. And if you don't have the time or interest to do the proper Microsoft 365 proactive checks, make remediation tickets for the checks, and complete the remediation tickets you made, then you need a partner to work with who can manage that and look after that for you until and if you can make the time to do it yourself. And at Xerillion, that's our Confident Cloud Advantage Managed Services, where we can monitor for items that need to be remediated and either send those alerts to you to fix, or we fix them for you. I know full well every IT manager out there believes they can handle the maintenance of a cloud services system. But I know what they're doing. I know what they're thinking. They're practicing keep the lights on IT management. Or in other words, if the system is up and online, it's good. And they never get around to consistently monitoring and remediating the 100 to 200 alerts and notifications that come off a Microsoft 365 system every single month. They let themselves get bogged down in the mundane legacy IT work. No matter what though, as I pointed out in this video here about maintaining Microsoft 365, which I'll link to in the description below, Microsoft 365 does need to be maintained and looked after. You need a templated checklist maintenance process that is tracked with an individual ticket in a ticketing system through completion, so it can be recorded as completed in your ticket system, which brings accountability, forcing you to stay on top of the 100, 200 notifications that come out of a Microsoft 365 system every single month. And when it comes to overall security management of a Microsoft 365 system, not just the general management, but the security management, you need a metric to measure your progress and to measure that you're keeping up with the Microsoft 365 technology changes and make sure that you aren't slipping backwards. And for that, you need a scoring mechanism. And fortunately, Microsoft has one built in called Microsoft 365 Secure Score. Currently, most IT departments have no formal way, besides their gut and what's in their head, to know what their existing security posture is as compared to a standard or even compared to peer companies of similar size and in their industry. Most IT managers don't have formal training and certification in business information systems. They're usually people who knew their way around computers enough to become entry-level help desk techs or network admins that rose up over time to take on more and more responsibility, but they're practicing keep the lights on IT work. And they don't have any firm guidance or metrics to score the security of the system they manage. And Microsoft 365 Secure Score solves this problem for us, and it comes with all versions of Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 Secure Score actively monitors the security configurations of your Microsoft 365 tenant, all the security services you have enabled and haven't enabled. And then for the ones you did enable, how you configured that service against a best practices baseline, and then judges you with a score. And it tracks that score over time with a chart, allowing you to see if your IT security is improving or if it's being neglected and flatlining, or if recommended changes are being neglected and your score is declining over time. Microsoft 365 Secure Score is monitoring security around your users' identities, their devices, and your Microsoft 365 cloud services, where email, chats, files, and phones are at. And it doesn't just judge you with the score, it also creates a prioritized checklist of recommendations in order of importance based on best practices. But what it can't do for you, and you must do for yourself or hire a partner to do for you, is work through and complete the recommendations one at a time in the prioritized order it gives you. Now, I'm telling you, most of these security recommendations require you to learn a new modern technology you're not familiar with, and you won't have the confidence to push out configurations to your entire network. For that, you'll need a Microsoft Cloud partner experienced and certified with advanced concepts of Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and the Microsoft Defender suite of security products. If you think because you can log into a portal, you'll get around to making the changes, it'll never happen. 6 to 9 months will go by and it'll just be sitting there on your to-do list, making you feel bad about yourself. And Microsoft 365 Secure Score has all the evidence of your neglect. Get a partner, do the configuration right, let them get you up to speed, and then determine if you have the time and confidence to take over the security advancement. But I'm telling you, the higher you get your Microsoft 365 Secure Score, the better your IT life becomes. The less your users will be calling you with tedious support needs that frustrate both you and the user. And the more confident you'll be about the stability and security of your IT system. I've seen this with our own system at Xerillion, and I've seen this with our clients. And that's why we have tasks as part of our managed services that require us to note the client's current Microsoft 365 Secure Score, review the next item to be done, and make a ticket to complete that next item. It's that important. Now, some companies are required by a customer or a regulating body to legally comply with a set of security standards. And these standards go beyond technical implementation as scored by Microsoft 365 Secure Score, but also cover required practices around documentation, policies, and procedures. And for that, we step up from Microsoft 365 Secure Score to Microsoft 365 Compliance Manager using the data protection baseline template as our guide. Where we see this come into play is clients that have legal regulatory compliance requirements in order to operate their business or work for a customer. So say that customer is the United States Department of Defense. The client of ours would have to comply with FedRAMP or NIST, or if our client were in financial services and they're regulated by the SEC or FINRA. But the bottom line is they need to be able to show an auditor from those regulatory bodies that the client is following requirements in order to become a vendor, or show an auditor that they're following requirements in the event there was some type of incident involving a complaint or a lawsuit. The regulation requirements over technical configurations, documentation, policies, and procedures around how the company does business to reduce risk. And from our experience, whenever a client is faced with trying to follow regulatory compliance, they're faced with a massive bureaucratic template that looks ridiculous to try and follow for a company of their size and requires a full-time compliance manager and bogs down an internal IT department trying to implement IT technologies they're not trained on and don't have experience with. And it just looks very overwhelming and expensive to implement. Microsoft 365 Compliance Manager solves this. Microsoft 365 Compliance Manager, using the data protection baseline template, takes Microsoft's best practices and compliance components from NIST, ISO, FedRAMP, and GDPR and puts them together to come up with a roadmap that you can work with for technical controls, procedures, and policies for your organization. Even if you only hit the first 20 to 30 items out of the 200 or so on the list, you can consider yourself in good shape to get through an audit and better off than 99% of your peers. And it's included with all versions of Microsoft 365. And what's really cool is that by clicking a button, Microsoft 365 Compliance Manager will generate a very nice Excel spreadsheet with all the regulations laid out and showing all the key items that you've completed, along with the completion and testing date. All you have to do is slap on a company logo and it looks pretty, and you have yourself then a very professional and formal looking compliance document that you can show anybody that cares. So while I'd start with Microsoft 365 Secure Score as a technical internal guide, if you really want to polish off your IT beyond just technical controls, but also have defined policies, procedures, and documentation guided by Microsoft best practices and industry standards, then you'd move into Microsoft 365 Compliance Manager. Now, it's one thing to talk about all the IT security management features inside of Microsoft 365, but let's break down the subscriptions you're going to need. And I'm going to show you the subscriptions we commonly set up clients with. First, a typical subscription, and that would be Microsoft 365 Business Premium for $20 per user per month. And there's no question about it. It provides the absolute best overall value in a Microsoft 365 Cloud Services subscription for a business. The only issue is that it's limited to 300 users. And after that, you have to use enterprise class subscriptions instead of business class subscriptions. Or more specifically, Microsoft 365 E3 subscriptions, which are more expensive at $32 per user per month with less technology bundled in. But if you're a larger company with 500 to 1,000 plus users, that's what you need and should be using in any event. And you can mix and match business and enterprise subscriptions. Now, as I've said many times before, the security foundation of everything we talked about in this video rests on Azure Active Directory Premium. And you get that with Microsoft 365 Business Premium, as well as many of the other advanced security technologies I went over in this video. What you don't get with Microsoft 365 Business Premium are security features that use behavioral machine learning threat detection for identity protection, insider threat protection, and endpoint protection. And those are all features of Microsoft's top subscription, the subscription we use at Xerillion called Microsoft 365 E5, which would be the subscription companies that want to be able to brag to clients, investors, or board of directors that they have the most secure enterprise cloud IT system that Microsoft makes. They would get Microsoft 365 E5, which is $57.50 per user per month. But if Microsoft 365 E5 doesn't make sense for your company, what you can do is break out the behavioral machine learning threat detection security services I went over in this video of Microsoft 365 as an add-on bundle to a lower tier Microsoft 365 Business Premium subscription. And then you get all the advanced behavioral machine learning security protection at an overall reduced price. And we do that all the time for clients, and it's called the Microsoft 365 E5 Security Add-on, and it's $12 per user per month, in addition to the Microsoft 365 Business Premium base subscription of $20 per user per month. Then it's typical to move the company phone system into Microsoft 365, which, in addition to increasing collaboration and modernization in your company using Microsoft Teams, completes the business continuity planning IT needs to provide for the company by migrating the company phone system into Microsoft Teams, which we talked about earlier in this video. And the phone system is $20 per user per month. So adding all these together puts us around the cost of $52 per user per month. And when you have that, you now have email, files, phones, security, and IT management controls all inside of Microsoft 365. And ideally, all of your business apps around sales, finance, and operations are third-party web apps accessed through the Microsoft Edge web browser and controlled through Azure Active Directory single sign-on. And any legacy server-based apps are moved into a Microsoft Azure virtual network. And in doing this, you'll have achieved full business continuity in the event your office is not available due to a fire, flood, pandemic, or other natural disaster. And again, with a full Microsoft 365 cloud services system, you get complete business continuity included for free. Then there are the additional subscription options we set up clients with. For your users that don't work on their own dedicated computers, such as those that work at a multi-user terminal at a front desk, or medical personnel that move from room to room, or users that work on central computers on a shop floor and just need access to the Microsoft Office web apps on a web browser or mobile apps on a tablet or smartphone, but we need to manage their access through modern Microsoft 365 security controls, but they don't need the same level of Microsoft 365 data and service resources. We would use Microsoft 365 F3 at $8 per user per month. As I mentioned before, For a company that wants the top, most secure subscription that Microsoft makes, you'd get Microsoft 365 E5, which is the subscription we use at Xerillion and our clients and financial services typically use. And it's $57 per user per month and includes all the security technology we went over in this video, every single bit of it, and includes the Microsoft Teams phone system. You just need to add on the calling plan, which is $12 per user per month, bringing Microsoft 365 E5 with the Microsoft Teams phone system and the calling plan to $69 per month. And it's important to know that when we set document versioning and data retention policies to protect our data in Microsoft 365, and now users are able to roll back and restore files, once we go over our initial allotment of 1 terabyte for the Microsoft 365 tenant and 10 gigabytes per user pooled onto that initial 1 terabyte allotment, you'll be charged an additional 20 cents per gigabyte per month. Now, if your data retention policy deletes old useless files, as it should, you shouldn't run into this problem. But if you're a company with tons of files and tell us to set up a retention policy of keeping everything forever, you could run into an additional monthly cost to carry around all those old files with you. So again, you should really put in a data lifecycle policy that only keeps legal documents forever and deletes old files that haven't been modified in 7 years and emails and chats after 3 years permanently. Now, all this modern Microsoft 365 cloud security tech is really cool, but it's also very overwhelming. I remember the first time I got an Excel spreadsheet from our Microsoft Partner Manager that listed the entire Microsoft 365 security and management stack. I remember thinking there was so much to try to make sense of. At that point, modern Microsoft 365 security seemed so much more complex than anything else we had learned to implement for clients at Xerillion. The Microsoft 365 security technologies available to you are vast and dense. I highly recommend you get oriented as you were doing watching this video, and watch this video 2 or 3 times while you're working out, doing some low intensity zone 2 cardio. Then get some basic free training on Microsoft's Learn website, and then challenge yourself to really learn this tech by achieving Microsoft certifications. First of all, there's learn.microsoft.com, and it's 100% free and gets you some good level 1 training. My video you're watching right now gives you the orientation around how this system looks to an IT manager who is used to a traditional on-premise server-based system, and how a transition to Microsoft 365 will look to you, and the technologies you'll need to configure, and how they all play together. And it'll help you have a thoughtful conversation with your Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider. But to get to the point where you can do some light administration, you need to do the training at learn.microsoft.com. If the training interests you, but after 6 months, you realize that you've never made it a priority in the evening to complete the training, and you'll never get a quiet stretch of 2 hours at work on a consistent basis to complete the training, and you're being honest with yourself that you never will, then engage your Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider to help you manage the system after they've helped you to deploy it. Don't Google search your way through this while learning ad hoc bits and pieces. Make quiet time in the evening, not during work, where you can put 1.5 hours on your phone timer and start working your way through these lessons and complete the quizzes. And I've pulled the 4 most relevant lessons to get you going. Here is 15 hours of solid training that require a relatively forgiving open book test, and it isn't super hard to pass. And you can then connect this to your Microsoft certification dashboard, telling the world you are a verified learner and not just a talker. And let me tell you, as someone who's interviewed probably close to 500 techs in my life, talkers are very, very common. But the people that can talk the talk and have verifiable third-party certificates are extremely rare. And let me tell you something further. While actual Microsoft certifications are the holy grail, if a job candidate came to me showing certificate completions through their Microsoft certification dashboard, even the free ones I'm talking about here, that would really impress me and set them apart from job applicants that just talk. I like techs that can talk the talk as well as show third-party proof of formal learning. And again, right here, it's all free to you. You just have to suck it up and make the time. Don't turn on the video games, don't turn on the TV or fire up YouTube or TikTok on your phone. No excuses. get it done. And this is the list of formal Microsoft certifications we require our techs to complete. And our expectation is that they get it done over about 18 months. Anything less than 2 months per certification means you aren't seriously studying 1.5 to 2 hours a night, 4 to 5 nights a week. And that's what it takes to study Microsoft certification, practice test questions, and pass a Microsoft certification exam. This is serious training. It takes about 70 hours of focused training over 2 months, reviewing practice test questions over and over with different scenarios and different types of questions around the same concepts to pass a Microsoft certification. The process is tedious and exhausting, but you learn so much. And this is the type of cloud engineer we build here at Xerillion. So we went over a ton here, and don't let it get you paralyzed. And for sure, don't keep your head buried in the sand. Make these changes. If you're an in-house IT manager or your full-time job in the company is something other than IT, but you play IT manager as a side gig for your company, or your company outsources your IT. In any of these cases, you need to find a Microsoft Cloud Solutions Provider, also known as a Microsoft CSP. It doesn't have to be Xerillion, and we aren't a fit for everybody. We work with companies that have between 20 to 500 users with Microsoft commercial cloud subscriptions, and we are the reseller and supporter of those Microsoft Cloud subscriptions. And from there, a company can use us for project-only services or managed services on the back end, or full managed services that includes our in-house help desk. But this is a big transition, and there are so many landmines to look out for, and we can help you avoid them. Again, my advice, watch this video 1 or 2 more times to get oriented on how it all works together. Then get some free basic training at learn.microsoft.com. 15 hours is a great start, and you should be able to complete the courses and quizzes. My video will help you be able to connect the dots and get beyond not knowing what you don't know, and be able to have a smart, thoughtful conversation with a Microsoft Cloud Solutions Provider. And the training at learn.microsoft.com will give you some beginner training and build confidence to do some light Microsoft 365 security and management administration. For sure, your first project needs to be getting multi-factor authentication enabled for everyone, not just the IT admins, but everybody in the company. And then get your files migrated to Microsoft Teams and OneDrive. And usually doing that allows you to finally get rid of your Windows Server, Active Directory, domain controllers, and backup disaster recovery system, saving the company money on their operating budget and getting the company out of the business of spending money on server hardware refreshes. And if you want to talk with us, I'd recommend going to our website at Xerillion.com, check us out. And if we seem like we could possibly be a fit for your company, fill out our contact form and we'll promptly set up a call and go from there. Or if you prefer to call us live to set up an appointment rather than fill out a contact form, you can reach us 847-995-9800. Thanks for watching. And remember, there has never been a more exciting time to be in IT than right now. I'll see you in the next video.